Following a dramatically franchise-altering move, have the Spurs already set themselves up with the next Kawhi Leonard? And furthermore, has he been solidified as Pop's final project as he approaches the twilight of his coaching career? Stay tuned. If the messy and unprofessional Kawhi Leonard breakup came to be what ultimately defined the great Gregg Popovich's final years of coaching in the NBA, it would be a truly disappointing end to perhaps the most storied and decorated stretches in the history of professional sports. For over 2 decades, San Antonio has always fielded a competitive club, not simply making the playoffs, but year in, year out, they somehow always managed to weasel themselves into the conversation as one of the league's top teams. Over the past 22 seasons under Gregg Popovich, the Spurs have brought home 5 championships, whereas the trio of Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker stand alone as the most winningest trio in NBA history. No dynasty can last forever, but in San Antonio, it has always felt different. From the top down, they built a culture of perpetual selflessness, dedication, and loyalty. Whether you were an all-NBA superstar or a role player, in order to put on a Spurs jersey, you must first leave your ego at the door, and the results speak for themselves. Hence the shock we collectively felt as NBA fans when Kawhi decided to do what he did, and more importantly even the way he did what he did. The disrespectful, sloppy, and unprofessional manner in which he handled the entire situation was something we could have never foreseen after crowning him as the prototypical Spurs star, the quintessential Tim Duncan successor, a player who seemed to embody every last one of these aforementioned traits: selfless, dedicated, loyal. Well, I guess that wasn't entirely the case. But I don't want to point fingers and place all the blame on Kawhi. There were many moments where the organization themselves seemed to slip from their own altruistic, orderly identity. From David Robinson to Tim Duncan to Kawhi Leonard, the Spurs have worked themselves into a position to consistently do the unthinkable in the NBA, seamlessly remain competitive as they transition from generation to generation, from one superstar to the next, without going through the dreaded and normally inevitable rebuild phase. Kawhi was seen as that heir to Tim Duncan's throne, who embodied all the same virtuous qualities: humble, unselfish, team-oriented, and he quietly went about his business outside of the limelight. He just put his head down and worked, and cut out all the other distractions. An attitude that has come to define a franchise. And after the Duncan, Parker, Ginobili trio had long expired, the Spurs were meant to belong to Kawhi. At least that's what was supposed to happen. That's who he was supposed to be, but his perspective and his attitude seems to have shifted drastically. And just how telling is it that today, the qualities he's come to represent seem to have flipped into the opposite of what that dynasty was founded upon. And now with the retired Duncan, Tony in Charlotte, and a 41-year-old Manu Ginobili on his last legs, Kawhi's departure for Toronto has created a rift in the Spurs' long-term plans and their future. For the first time ever, the Spurs dynasty is on the brink of falling. Has the time finally come? Will their hand be forced straight into that complete rebuild they've managed to elude now for over 2 decades? Between the endless off-court drama from the Kawhi saga to his wife Erin passing in April, this past year has been one of the toughest for Pop to endure. After 5 championships, 3 Coach of the Year awards, and 21 consecutive playoff appearances, it would truly be a tragedy if Pop's magnificent run as the mastermind behind the Spurs dynasty came to an end at the hands of a disgruntled Kawhi, rather than ending with the huge bang his greatness more than warranted. As he returns for another season, he now faces perhaps the biggest challenge of his career. But this is Pop we're talking about after all, and he always seems to have some tricks up his sleeve. Whenever an iteration of a Spurs squad is considered too old or washed up, they always seem to prove doubters wrong anyway and exceed expectations. I mean, just a quick glance in this past season's team, with Kawhi missing 73 games, it wasn't necessarily a roster packed to the brim with talent. yet the Spurs still managed to convincingly win 47 games in the unrelenting Western Conference. Pop's magic tends to be that he gets the best out of any given roster and year in, year out finds a way to create a great culture and get each and every player, from stars to role players to inactive backups to even the two-way players who spend a large portion of the season away from the team, to buy into the culture he's created. He, along with the developmental staff that's widely regarded as one of the best in the league, has had a direct impact in taking players, whether they be established stars or very raw prospects, and molding them into the best possible versions of themselves. With the number 18 pick in the most recent draft, the Spurs selected who could be a hidden gem in Lonnie Walker IV, a 19-year-old guard. His 6'4", 6'5", 195-pound frame with a 6'10" wingspan is eerily similar to Victor Oladipo, and though they don't share near identical measurements across the board, Donovan Mitchell comes to mind as well. Two players that have taken a face value short or below average stature for their positions and converted that into their strength by utilizing the oftentimes overlooked length and wingspan that they possess. Recall the greatest fascination in Kawhi as the NBA draft prospect, which were his enormous claw-like hands. People were simply mesmerized by the potential greatness this rare physical profile could provide for him as a rebounder and as a defender, and that potential found its way to a reality under Pop and the rest of the Spurs staff. In Walker, the Spurs have found themselves another prospect with a rare physical profile that gives him a tremendous advantage in these early growth stages of his career. Now, to put it simply, while being an explosive, athletic 19-year-old guard with tons of upside and a unique blend of size and athleticism out of the guard position that's shown great flashes of potential as a shot creator, while defensively with his physical gifts he could be an absolute monster, Walker is still a raw prospect. But many scouts believe he could develop into a lockdown defender at either guard position, while having the versatility to switch onto different positions seamlessly. But he is a long-term project. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but there are many areas in which he needs to improve to compete at the next level, specifically playmaking, ball handling, efficiency, and decision making. His summer league showing proved that there's a lot of work that needs to come on his end for him to live up to that potential. However, under Pop and the Spurs developmental staff, there's perhaps no better place for a project like Walker to land. We must remember Kawhi's career trajectory here. Even after receiving the Finals MVP award in his third season, he was still nowhere near his full potential offensively, nowhere near the eruption of a breakout season he would put together in his fifth year. In many ways, Kawhi Leonard was a project as well. Popovich, speaking on his summer league performance, even mentioned that Lonnie reminded him of a young Ginobili, the way he twists and contorts his body away from defenders as he finishes, while being somewhat unorthodox, is extremely effective. Lonnie also seems to have already bought into the famed Spurs culture. After one of the games, he readily admitted, "It's about my defense more than my offense," vowing to give 110% on that end of the ball because, quote, "that's what makes you a Spur." It seems as though the Spurs are going to follow the Kawhi blueprint here. This is not to say that Lonnie and Kawhi are similar players. They're quite different. What they are two somewhat overlooked prospects early in each of their respective careers that feature elite athleticism, useful physical tools, and a tremendous work ethic. They both projected as intense two-way players who could be dominant on both sides of the ball, but unrefined, undeveloped as they come into the league. He is not the next Kawhi in terms of matching Kawhi's exact production and style of play on the court. He is the next Kawhi-like project for Pop to micromanage, and perhaps the final project of his world-renowned career, as he hopes to duplicate at least a fraction of the success found with Kawhi Leonard. In Walker, alongside other prospects that they will be grooming, such as a 21-year-old DeJounte Murray and the newest addition 22-year-old Jakob Poeltl, the Spurs have sneakily built a repertoire of high-potential prospects who will be very good throughout Popovich's remaining years, and as he looks to set them up for great success in his absence, likely very good for years to come. And through them, his legacy will live on into the next era of San Antonio Spurs basketball, the appropriate storybook ending to an illustrious career. But Pop's remaining seasons will not be determined by the success of one young prospect or even a handful of talented youth. The narrative will be determined by the success of his team as a whole. And at the same time, Lonnie Walker is not the only player in position to experience new heights under Pop. So the story of that player and the story of an organization as a whole looking to salvage the remnants of a shattered dynasty will be told through the final installment of this 2-part video series. Look out for that coming later this week. Alright, that's where I'm gonna leave it. For more basketball content where journalism meets storytelling, subscribe and hit that bell for post notifications. And as always, leave any thoughts, feelings, perspectives in the comment section down below. And I'm gonna be back soon. Till then, peace.